Hey there, budgeteers. Are you ready to unlock the power of each payday and take control of your finances like a boss? Introducing the Payday Power Planner from New Money Habits. This isn't your average budgeting tool. Oh no. With the Payday Power Planner, you'll harness the unique rhythm of your paychecks to supercharge your financial game. Say goodbye to the confusion of monthly budgets and hello to the clarity of every payday. You'll know exactly when money is coming in and when it's going out, giving you the edge you need to stay on top of your finances. But that's not all. With the Payday Power Planner, you'll easily spot whether you're rocking a surplus or facing a deficit. Armed with this knowledge, you'll make informed decisions that set you up for financial success. It's time to transform your relationship with money and create the new money habits you need to achieve financial freedom. Get your hands on the Payday Power Planner from New Money Habits today and start making every dollar count. Don't let financial stress hold you back. Create a better plan for your money and seize the power of your pay period and thrive with the Payday Power Planner. Visit newmoneyhabits.com now to grab your free copy and unleash your financial potential. Coming up on this episode of the New Money Habits podcast.
And even though that's not what the person intended, what the parent intended for that child to hear, it's something that they now believe at the level of subconscious that they don't even know. And someday when they grow up and they're getting frustrated, with their child, or they start getting really angry when somebody takes something from them, or they're asked to give something away and they're like, I'm not going to give that away. It's because of this message that was given to them, whether it was intended or not.
All right, Maria. Excited again to have you back on. I could get used to this. So might be tapping you on the shoulder more than you are anticipating.
Looking forward to it.
I think you bring great value to our listeners and to our clients. And so cannot wait to talk a little bit about our topic today, which is really the psychology behind our behavior with money. We all relate with money in different ways. And there's reasons for that. There are these subconscious lessons that we've learned through our childhood or just through even our young adulthood in managing money, that we started relating with it in very specific ways, and just kind of wanted to have a conversation with you about why we do what we do and what are some of the things we can start to identify in our own behaviors to say, wow, I didn't know that was a thing for me, but now that I do, I can do something about it. And I'll even give you an example outside of money real quick. As I was going through some therapy in my own life for things like anger, as I dug into some of these subconscious lessons that I learned as a child, and they were brought to my consciousness, like, wow, I didn't know I felt that way about that. Okay, now that I know that, I can actually respond differently. I can actually see when that thing occurs, and I can actually respond differently. It was amazing, and I'm hoping our conversation will lend some of that to our listeners today.
Yeah, I hope so too. What you just described is really a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy type things, where we recognize the connection between the way we think, the way we feel, the way we act, and then the consequence that comes from all of that. And it's just like this cycle that continues, because then we have that consequence and we think a way about that and we feel a way about that, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm thrilled to hear that that's been working for you and when it comes to dealing with anger. And I really, really appreciate the idea that you just mentioned about how things are sometimes placed in our subconscious. And, I heard a story the other day about, this actually is related to money, but it was the idea of relationships versus possessions. And it was actually very, very convicting for me, because it was kind of about how, we start to become so attached to our stuff that we sometimes react poorly when, say, for example, one of our children is trying to set the table for us and they drop the plate, and maybe our lives are just in a state of chaos. Maybe, there's a bajillion other things going on. And we wouldn't really be as upset about that plate, but maybe we are because, it's a thing that we've been told things are really important to us. And we go crazy on the kid. We yell at them, and that child has now it's been placed on their soul that possessions are more important than relationships. And even though that's not what the person intended, what the parent intended for that child to hear, it's something that they now believe in at the level of subconscious that they don't even know. And someday when they grow up and they're getting frustrated, with their child, or they start getting really angry when somebody takes something from them, or they're asked to give something away and they're like, I'm not going to give that away. It's because of this message that was given to them, whether it was intended or not. And so this really is so important because when it comes to finances, I mean, there are so many messages that we hear growing up. And like I said, sometimes they're intentional messages and sometimes they're just consequential and circumstantial. And we don't know like where they came from. And I mean, I always say I have 4 children. So for your listeners who don't know, I have 4 children. They range in age from up to 20 down to 5. And they're all girls. And I have screwed every single one of them up. And I know that. And I have prepared myself for that. And I prepared them for that. It's just one of those things, like every day we find out, oh, what did I say to you in my moment of weakness, in my moment of anger? And, and sometimes it's not even something that was intended to be harmful. And yet it was because of the way they interpreted. So there's just so many things going on. There's the way we say things, the way that we interpret things, and vice versa. And so when it comes to our money, man, it's a very convoluted topic. So I don't know where you want to go with it today, but I don't think we want to go everywhere because it would be way too long of an episode. But we can definitely pick apart a couple things and maybe even talk about this on another time as well.
Yeah, no, I think I want to maybe dive into some of those subconscious messages that get implanted on us. As you were sharing that, I was getting convicted about how I yell at the kids about, don't jump on my couch.
Right? I mean,
oh boy, like that was definitely a subconscious lesson learned, and it made me as a child feel like the couch was more important. And now as a parent, it's like, do I really value the couch more than my children just having fun? I want them to respect things so that it doesn't get broken, that sort of thing, right? There is an element of that.
That's right. That's right. So maybe there you just say, don't jump on the couch because it's still the couch. And those things should not necessarily be jumped on. But it does that, even that slight change of verbiage from my to the, it really does make a difference. We don't think that it does, but language really, really matters. So
yes, and I agree with you wholeheartedly there. So I guess let's start with asking ourselves, or me asking you, how does somebody start to identify some of the subconscious lessons that they may have been taught to bring those to their consciousness so that they can start to think, feel, and behave differently?
I think one of the first things to do is to identify certain activating events that got you to a place that you don't want to be. So, going back to the anger, if I can.
Yeah, please.
The idea that there was something that angered you, that you became angry about, and you felt it. You know what the activating event is, but we typically don't subconsciously or consciously, know what is being said about our thought in that moment. And so we play with what we already know. So the activating event, so maybe let's bring this into the context of finances for our listeners. So maybe you're somebody who just can't pass up a sale. That's pretty common. And the activating event is that you received some sort of marketing that, last day for X, Y, and Z. And you went and spent $150 on that particular thing. You can identify the event. You can even identify the action that you did. You can probably identify the feeling that you had in there. But we have to kind of get into what was the thought that you had. Now, there might be a conscious thought with a subconscious precursor, if you will. So what would a conscious thought be around that? Maybe you don't have this problem, so I'm not even asking you personally, but just in general.
In general, as the voice of the audience.
someone
I,
in which does have this problem, I'm
yeah,
sure.
I would imagine there's the fear of missing out. Like if I
Sure.
don't get this sale today,
Yep.
then when I want this item in the future, I'm going to pay more for it.
Yes. Yes. That's definitely something that's right there. Um, and so what do you think would be at a more subconscious level for that? I know I'm asking you some big questions right now.
Yeah, that's tough. I don't know that I can come up with what would be at the subconscious level that they don't even know is happening. Um, it was probably an observed behavior of somebody else first, or could have been, right? You observe somebody else being impulsive, and then talking about like the need to be impulsive or the need to take advantage of this sale. And so subconsciously that script is playing in your head and you don't even know it.
Okay. I'm gonna go back for a second and just say when I asked what a conscious thought might be, can you repeat what you said?
I said the fear of missing out, that
Okay.
I need to take advantage of this now.
Okay. So the first thing that you led with, is that a thought or is that a feeling?
The fear of missing out
Hmm.
specifically, no, that
Yeah.
would be the subconscious
Well,
telling
and
you.
it's a feeling, right? It's not even a thought so much. A fear is more of an emotion.
Mm.
It's more of that the feeling that is coming up. Whereas the second part of what you said actually is a thought. So there's a fear of missing out because I might not have this chance again. So
Yeah.
that you actually identified the emotion and the thought without even realizing that you did that. The reason I want to go back and actually pinpoint that is because if you react to something out of fear when it comes to a sale, then chances are a lot of the other money choices that you're making are also a reaction to fear.
Mm.
It might not be fear of missing out. It might be fear of running out. It might be fear of not being able to provide for your family. It might be fear of, could be fear of death. I mean, there could be so many things that are actually there. But the idea of fear is, okay, well, that's causing me, excuse me, to react in this particular way when it comes to the way I act with money. So it's so important to identify that before we can even go into what is that subconscious. That's my fault for going down that path for you
Mm.
first. But it really is important to identify what that emotion is. Now, there could be all sorts of thoughts around that, and we just talked about a couple of them. But there are all of these things that, again, are circumstantial. Sometimes they're not something that you even think about, but you go back far enough, you're like, oh yeah, I could see where that is. But without having to go into the whole therapizing part of all of this, because
Mhm.
that's not what everybody needs. You can use this in order to identify some of your patterns. And that's really what I want to make sure people are doing is being able to identify, are there patterns of thoughts and behaviors thoughts and feelings that are leading to a specific type of behavior for myself. And you can do that without having to go through therapy and figure out the why behind everything. So I hope that helps a little more.
Hey there, budgeteers. You know, good news can only be good news if there's bad news. So, what's the bad news? The bad news is you and I have a deadly disease called sin, and this disease causes us to rebel and disobey God. See, God is holy, righteous, and just, and He cannot be in the presence of sin. So, this horrible disease of ours separates us from the God who created us. And the bad news gets worse. There isn't anything you or I can do to make ourselves right with God. We are dead in our sins and on our way to an eternity separated from God. But that's not God's will for us. See, for God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whoever believes in Him should not perish but have everlasting life. God did what only God could do. He made a way for us to be reconciled to Him through Jesus Christ. Jesus came into the world to save sinners like you and me. While we were still sinners, storing up God's anger against us for our rebellion and disobedience, Christ died for us. Jesus took the punishment that you and I deserve and have earned. Jesus is the substitute for your punishment and mine. Now, isn't that some good news? The word gospel means good news. The gospel of Jesus Christ is that you and I broke God's law and Jesus paid the fine. When we place our faith and trust in Jesus, we get to experience God's grace and mercy. Our gratitude should turn us from our rebellious and disobedient sin toward God, seeking after Him and His righteousness. When we do, God gives us a new heart and a new mind. Praise God for His goodness, and remember, God loves, humans sin, Jesus saves.
Yeah, but to your point, right? It's not financial coaching and therapy, two different things, but the commonality there is, can you identify some things that are new, seem like new information to you? Like, oh, I didn't know that that's how I behaved because of that trigger
Yeah.
or that activating event. So now that I know that that's an activating event, wow, okay, I can think about it differently. I can feel about it differently. I can process it differently so that I then behave differently.
Correct.
I know we have, on our last episode, we kind of introduced this idea of people thinking they know what they want, right? What I think I want versus what I actually want. And when we think about that in terms of how I behave with money, and I think I want to manage my money better and pay off more debt. What do I actually want when it comes to how I am thinking, feeling, and behaving with money?
Well, I think it's going to be depending on the person who's actually looking at some of this. Somebody who thinks that that's what they want. Some people actually do want that. But because you mentioned, wanting to pay off debt, that kind of thing. And some people really do want to pay off debt. But again, as we kind of talked about last time you and I were together, what is it? What's the underlying reason for wanting that? We talked about how there could be stress around something, but that even isn't a great one because it's going to be stressful to pay off that debt. Well, what is it that actually makes you want to do it? Is there peace around that? Is there a sense of security around that? Maybe you feel a sense of, self-reliance. If you have no debt, you're not, indebted to somebody. Maybe it's actually a lot more spiritual, like you mentioned on the last episode, that, it's actually, no, I don't want to be in debt to somebody because biblically it says that that's not awesome. So it just depends on what the reason is that somebody wants to do what they're saying they're wanting to do.
Yeah, I think plenty of people want to be debt free, but understanding like the why behind that. For me, financial freedom, being free of Scripture tells us that the borrower is slave to the lender. And so wanting to be free to do what I want, when I want, without having to carry around the burden of debt in the meantime is certainly why I want for myself to get out of debt. But I guess what I'm also trying to process in my own mind, right? Because I go back to, I'm very pragmatic. And when I sit down with a client, it's all like, hey, we're just going to roll up our sleeves. We're going to look at the numbers, but also trying to get better at understanding, hey, here's why you're behaving the way you're behaving with money. Let's identify what those things are, the barriers that keep you from doing something different or new, so that you can actually embrace new money habits, hence the term new.
I'm going to use an example, one that I know you actually are very familiar with, and that is a couple that we recently actually talked to. When we were talking about the habits that this couple had started to implement and then fell out of that habit, it took just a little bit of time to realize that the reasons for engaging in the behavior they were engaging, and in this case, we're talking about like grocery shopping, okay? Nothing super sexy about this. But they were wanting to have time together. And so they would go to the grocery store together. And what we found very quickly was that wasn't working for them. There was a really important reason that wasn't working for them, because the circumstances around that were stressful. And by the time they actually got up to the counter, they were not just appeasing each other by just like, okay, put that in the cart if you want to. Okay, spend more than we said we were going to when we came up, because there was all of this stress around the thing in general. So what they were looking at is, we don't want to give up this thing, this time together. And they didn't say that, though. They said, well, we can't really stick to this budget. And so what we were able to do is help identify, what is it that you actually want here? And like, well, we want some time together. And so, okay, well, let's work in some date nights. That, I don't know if that's the answer to the question you were looking
Yeah.
for, but what I hear you asking is, if somebody's stuck in these particular habits, how do we change that up? How do we make that different? And I really think, even though it doesn't appear pragmatic to say, well, we got to figure out, why are we doing the things we're doing anyway? It really is the reason we have to figure that out, so that we can make pragmatic suggestions that actually will work for people. Because if we had just dug our heels in and said, well, you just need a better budget money, you just or number, you just need a better process to do this. We just need dot dot dot. If we had not been able to identify and address the underlying issue, which is, we just really want some time together, and if we have that in a different setting, we probably don't need to force ourselves to go through this process of grocery shopping together. That's going to actually help in the process. So I don't know if that helps.
No, it really does help. And it actually leads me to like another point. A key takeaway for me in that conversation was, I almost asked the question, and I'm so glad I didn't, but I almost asked the question that, well, what if there was just more money to spend in that particular category, right? Because to your point, there are multiple variables, but now I'm just kind of like shooting like darts at a dartboard. Like, so is it this? Is it because you're carrying cash? Oh, no, it's not that. Is it because you don't have enough and we should increase the number for that category? No, that's not it. Oh, is it because of the drive and needing to go into the store? No, that's not. And so there's all these other things we could have tried to do to, quote, fix it, right? Hey, why don't you start doing online order and pickup so you don't have to go into the store? Oh, but like you said, being able to really understand what was really going on in that situation. It wasn't about the method by which they were managing their money. It wasn't the number by which they were writing in for that category. It wasn't even the approach about whether or not to go to the store or to order online. It had nothing to do with any of those things. Right? And so understanding, so what's going on in that. And you used some language that I just thought was brilliant. Like, what story are you telling yourself? And how do we rewrite that story? And I think that really ties into this idea of, when you understand how you think about money, how that makes you feel, and how it drives your behaviors, when you can think about it differently through a different perspective and a paradigm shift, then you can feel about it differently and ultimately behave differently.
Hey there, budgeteers. Are you tired of feeling like your finances are running the show? Well, it's time to flip the script and take charge of your money with New Money Habits Financial Coaching. This isn't your typical financial advice. New Money Habits is about empowering you with the knowledge and tools you need to make savvy money moves and build a solid financial foundation. Here's the deal. We're offering a free discovery session to kickstart your journey to financial freedom. Yep, you heard me right. Free. In this session, one of our experienced coaches will help you to pinpoint your financial goals and create a better plan for your money. We're talking about mastering your money mindset, picking up practical money management skills, and having someone to hold you accountable along the way. So, if you're ready to kiss financial stress goodbye and say hello to a brighter financial future, then schedule your free session today to create the new money habits you need to achieve financial freedom.
Yeah. And you just summed up so beautifully one of the things that I would tell my substance abuse clients way back when. And oftentimes people are afraid of change. It's not easy. It quite frankly sucks sometimes to make these changes and have them be sustainable ones. And yet we we feel so great when we've actually accomplished it. So that's why you and I do what we do, because we want to see that transformation for people. But because it's so difficult to do sometimes, we come up with every excuse that we can to not actually do it. We find ways to blame other people around us. And if I may, I'm just going to throw this fun story out there. My daughter
Please.
recently, she put a grape up her nose. It was one of these very, very tiny grapes that are like smaller than a pea. So, just don't even ask me. Don't give me Mother of the Year awards because I do not deserve them. But she did. She stuck the scrape up her nose, and there was this whole to-do, and I ended up bringing her to three different places, an urgent care, an ER, and an ENT. All very, very frustrating. But I was extremely frustrated when we were at the emergency room because I didn't feel in my heart of hearts that I needed to be there. But the person at urgent care said, oh, yes, you do. You need to go there. And I was there under kind of like false pretenses because once it all unraveled, we realized that they weren't going to do anything different at the ER than what they just did at urgent care. So my blood was boiling, to say it lightly. I was so frustrated. And the biggest reason I was frustrated is because I knew that my daughter was fine. So there was really no issue or urgency with what was going on for her. And they weren't going to do anything that I didn't just go and do at the different place. And we have a high deductible plan. So I knew intellectually that every dollar that I was going to get charged at that ER is on me. And so that was very frustrating that I'm willing to pay for the money for my children, but it was frustrating that I did not get what I thought I was going to get. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So all of this is just to give you the setup that my daughter, who had kind of watched all this take place, and I ended up leaving the ER before a doctor saw her because I'm like, well, if I have to pay for the ER, I at least don't want to have to pay for the doctor as well. On the car ride home, this little girl, she's 5. She says, she's yapping in the back seat. And then she goes, and by the way, Mom, thank you. And I thought maybe this is like a sweet little moment between mother and daughter, and she's going to tell me something that I just did really well, right? And I said, well, you're welcome, honey. Thank you for what? And she said, for shoving the grape up my nose. She totally just said that I shoved the grape up her nose. Like she intuitively put the blame 100% on me. Like she watched all this happen. She's the one who did it. She came to me and said, I'm sorry, I put the grape up my nose. She told the lady, I put a grape up my nose. Like she owned it until we started talking about how frustrated Mom was because of all this. And now we have to go do this other doctor thing tomorrow. And all of a sudden she's like, thanks for you doing that to me, Mom. At 5. Okay. And so I'm just saying that as human beings, we have this tendency to want to blame other people. Thank goodness my train of thought is still here. The reason I'm sharing all of it is because my substance abuse clients, they would come in and they would want to explain away their decisions. And it actually made sense. It's like, look, you had a really, really rough childhood. Like you had some stuff done to you that is not okay. Your innocence was taken from you. You had this is what you watched. Like, this is how your brain developed. It was all very, very legitimate. And so we said, you know what? Your past is an absolute explanation for why you are here today. But we can no longer use that as an excuse for where you're going tomorrow. And you summed it up beautifully when you were talking about understanding why we are where we are, but now taking the responsibility for changing that. Now that we know how we think and feel and act in a certain situation, it's going to take some time. It's going to take some work, but we do have that ability. And I think as much as people are afraid of that, it really is the most empowering part of coaching because they can own that. And while there is oftentimes a lot of discomfort in owning our own poor behavior, there's so much empowerment in it because it means that we get to own the behavior going forward as well.
Yeah. I was having a conversation recently with another guest on the podcast about personal responsibility. And it's not easy. It's not. And I think sometimes for me, I have to remember how difficult that is for other people and really extend some compassion and some mercy and some grace there as they wrestle with that, because you're absolutely right. It's so good for you. It's so scary. It's so much easier. And we live excuse me, we live in a society here in the United States that suggests that it's okay, like, be the victim and just continue to be the victim, but no, be the victor, right? Like, grab life and excuse me, grab life and be victorious, because victory is right there for the taking. But it is so much easier to kind of point the finger and the blame and say, well, I am the way I am and I'm where I am because of all these other things. And while that is true, you are where you are in part because of those things. It's equally true, but more empowering to say, but I can make a change, and that
Yeah.
change can occur today.
Yeah. And I think one of the dangers of being allowed to just stay in victimhood, and again, it's not to take away real victimhood, but if we stay in there, it can easily turn into what my daughter was showing us, where it's like she actually wasn't the victim in something and found a way to twist that and blame somebody else for something that actually was her behavior. And again, I mean, she's just a 5-year-old kid. This is not something that's I'm not concerned about it. It's just a fun anecdotal story for what we're talking about. But it does actually, I see that happening where it's like we have all of this history that explains why you are in the way you are. I'm talking again about some of my substance abuse clients. And then we also have a spot where it stopped being that, now they know better, but they're not doing better. They're struggling to do better because change is really hard. And so you're absolutely right. We need to be able to give that mercy and that grace and that forgiveness and the compassion all within that spot. But we also need to be able to love them enough to be that solid reflection for them. Because I think so many times when people, they think, like we talked earlier, like they think they're seeking that, judgment-free and shame-free zone. They really just want somebody who loves them enough to turn the mirror around and say, this is what we're seeing. And sometimes those people have not had that in their lives. They haven't had somebody to turn the mirror around. They've only been told what they either want to hear, or the person who's talking to them who wants to keep them sick. And that's the other part too, right? There are people who want to keep us sick and dependent. And they've only seen that side. And so when we can compassionately turn that mirror around and say, this is what we're seeing, people appreciate that. They don't, it's not comfortable, but they do appreciate that. And I think ultimately that's what people really want when then they're coming to us.
Absolutely. And it ties into something else we've identified as what people think they want versus what they actually want. And that is, people think they want somebody else to do it for them.
Sure.
And the big important change is nobody can do that for you. I've said it so often. I have clients who want me to work with family members, loved ones. And I'm like, look, you and I cannot want it for them. We can't want it more than they want it.
Yeah.
And until they want it, until that drive is in them to say, enough is enough and I want to make a change, there's not a whole heck of a lot we can do except continue to just be patient and kind and love on them in a way that is healthy and not enabling.
I'm so glad you added it. Thank you.
Yep. Because you're absolutely right. I mean, I think a lot of people would call it tough love, right? But love somebody enough to tell them what they need to hear, not what they want to hear.
Yeah. Yeah. And as a parent, I think, I don't know if this is true, but just the notion of tough love, I used to think it was about, being tough on the kid. And I can tell you, as the person doing the loving in a way that's not enabling, that's tough for me, for the person doing it. And so I've actually heard tough love as being, this is a tough way for me to show love to somebody because, if you're a rescuer at heart, and there are so many of us, I mean, especially in the coaching field. So for those of you who are listening today, just know that there are a lot of coaches that you might go and see that are rescuers at heart. And so sometimes people have a hard time not being the rescuer in that moment. And that is tough for us.
Yeah. I know that I tend to have the fix it gene where it's all like, oh, you have a problem, I can fix it. It's like, no, how about listen and kind
It
of
is hard.
uncover what's really going on and then help others identify their own path to, fixing something and redeeming themselves and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, it's so much better for them anyway, I mean, we don't know our clients as well as they know themselves. So, and we never will. That would be absolutely silly for us to know, to think that we know who they are more than they do. So,
yeah. So even this coach needed to figure out, like, can't do it for your clients, right? Even though that's what they think they want, what they actually want is to be able to do these things successfully on their own. And so empowering them and equipping them to do those things are incredibly important. Maria, thank you again for another great conversation. In hopes that we've helped our listeners think about reflecting on how it is that they behave with money, where some of the subconscious lessons may have come from, bring those up to your consciousness so that you can then change the way you think, feel, and behave with money.
It's been a fun conversation. Thanks again for having me.
That does it for this episode of the New Money Habits podcast. Remember, if you have any questions, make sure to hit us up on social at New Money Habits and follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Please consider leaving a 5-star rating and review to help us spread this message of hope to people looking for a better plan for their money.